I don't care what anybody says. You're never going to stop learning. So any of these guys that pat themselves on the back that know everything, they're just foolish because it's always changing.
You want to feel the difference. And when that rod tip is too stiff, that very subtle, different pull is indiscernible from those little taps.
People will go up, they don't see bass popping, they make a couple casts, they leave. But they don't take the time to try and figure out what's going on under the surface.
They'll sit there, do 5 of those drifts and not catch one fish and just go. They'll just keep going to the next spot. Right. Not me, I'm staying there.
You have that moment with all sorts of species of fish where you realize you are not the one that's got the upper hand in the fight, and I realized that very quickly. That fish, it took off, it dug my rod tip right into the water.
Hello and welcome to the Salt Strong live stream and podcast. My name is Rich Natoli. I am the regular host of this Monday night edition and Friday podcast, and I'm joined, as almost always, by the very lovely, very talented Ed Gobo, owner of Captain Hangs Tackle. Ed, how you doing tonight?
Doing good, Rich. Doing good. Happy to be on tonight. I can actually, this is the second one in a row I've made, so I'm getting back up there. But
yeah, you're on a new streak.
Yeah. Well, I was in Florida, so you can't really blame me.
No, I don't blame you at all for that. I never thought that you'd be skipping out on time for fishing in Florida to come on, but I do applaud the attempt. So yeah, welcome back for the second week. Hopefully, well, I'm sure you'll be on next week for the third week. That's when we're going to have Captain Griffin on again, and we're going to talk about bull reds in the Chesapeake. So I'm guessing you're going to be on for that.
Yeah, I got the fever. So
yeah. So that's going to be fun, and we're going to have that charter coming up this summer with him. So I'm looking forward to that. I want to say hello to everybody in the chat. We have Bent Hill Fishing, Playing Hooky with David, I Feel Fishy, James Flynn, Crabbing and Fishing, Larry Matzinger, Joe Billups, Rob Whitmire, Philip Welsh, M.R. Johnson, Angel Perez, and Gene Dobley. Those are the ones that we can see right now. If you're in there and you haven't chatted, we don't know that you're there. So welcome to everybody else as well. Welcome to everybody listening afterwards on the podcast. Great to see you all. This is going to be a cool one. Have a couple of things to go over before that. And Ed, I want to see if you are aware of this. This is a little inside baseball for Salt Strong and the Insider Club. And I wanted to bring it up tonight because I'm extremely excited about this one. And Ed, I think you might have seen it. I tagged you on the post in the community, but there is a local chapter of Salt Strong opening up for South Jersey. And I am just so excited about that. So did you see that post?
I did. And I reached out to him. So hopefully he'll shoot me an email back. But yeah.
Yeah, it's I talked to him yesterday. It's going to be great. So you have the online part of Salt Strong is going local, and there's local chapters, and there are several down in Florida that just started, a couple more starting this week, and New Jersey is jumping right in there. So I'm looking forward to that. So if you're a Salt Strong member and you fish Southern New Jersey, go into the community, check out the post in the regional feed, and get in contact with the guys that are setting it up, and you'll be able to get in on that. It's going to be a lot of fun. So looking forward to that. The other bit of business is I do want to say, as Crabbing and Fishing has mentioned in the chat, happy anniversary, Ed.
Thank you. Yeah. What was it? The 21st, we celebrated 11 years married.
Yeah. Well, congratulations. I don't know how you fooled her for that long, but well done.
I had something off color to say, but I'll keep that one to myself.
Yeah, keep it to yourself. Yep, that's always a smart thing. She might be watching. So, all right. So we're going to roll into this one. This one is going to. So what we did before Salt Strong is we would do a season launch conversation, and it would be you and me and John Creeley, who has been on in the past, or somebody else, and we would go on and we would talk about an upcoming opener. Well, we have an upcoming opener, not this week, but next week. We have Fluke Summer Flounder opening in New Jersey. It's already open in Delaware. I honestly have to check Maryland. I think it is open in Maryland, or will be opening in Maryland. New York is going to be opening around the same time, so I'm not giving dates checking your own regulations in the state that you fish. But the second is opening in New Jersey. So we're going to kind of double that up with this one. We have Captain Harv from Vetcraft Sport Fishing that's going to be on. And we're also going to talk a little bit about conservation, a little bit about the health of the stocks. And we're going to talk about the New Jersey Artificial Reef program, which is just an amazing program. And you've seen what a few guys in Maryland could do. And I'll tell you what, I remember when there were no reefs off in New Jersey. Were really very, very few back in the day when I was fishing offshore. And I'm really looking forward to this one. So anything you want to add, Ed, before we bring Captain Harv on?
No, I think we can jump right into it.
All right, let's add him to the stream. Captain Harv, welcome.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Oh, it's great to have you on. It's we get a lot of questions about, or feedback, just saying, we want to talk more conservation. We want to talk more about some of the ancillary topics when it comes to fishing. So not necessarily how to get the fish all the time, but let's talk about conservation. And one of the things that has come up repeatedly is artificial reef systems and programs that are in various states. And you have some involvement with the New Jersey Artificial Reef. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, for people who don't know, the official New Jersey Artificial Reef program started in 1984. Actually, it was back in the 30s. Some of the charter captains up north were creating their own artificial reefs, but it was kind of not an official program. So in 1984, Bill Figley was the major designer of the artificial reefs, and he started the 15 artificial reefs all along the coast of New Jersey. And he was very active in procuring all kind of wrecks to sink on there. There's ships and there's concrete and tanks and you name it's been sunk out there. But it's a very, very important program because a lot of the coast, particularly the southern New Jersey, has lost a lot of its fishing grounds to commercial fishing, dragging of nets, destroying the bottom, coastal storms, sand replenishment on the beaches. When I first started fishing in New Jersey in the 1970s, there was a lot more structure, a lot more mussel beds, a lot more natural coral beds, and a lot of that is gone. So our artificial reefs are very important for us as fishermen, but they're also important for restoring the whole ecosystem along the coast of New Jersey.
And I'll tell you what, I remember back around when it started. I was young at the time, but we used to do a lot of offshore fishing, and you're right. I do remember the mussel beds and even oysters in the backwaters in certain areas. And I fish those same areas today, and there are no oysters. But when I put a camera down, I can see a lot of shells, but no live oyster. Well, very few live oyster beds anywhere in the extreme southern Cape May County area. And I'm happy to say that my family did put a sunken Coast Guard ship out. It's called Dr. Tom's Reef off of Wildwood in honor of my grandfather, who was just a dedicated South Jersey saltwater fisherman, and some reef balls around it. So it's a pretty cool program. It's awesome. The way that it's done and the way that it's organized is just amazing.
Yeah, a lot of people don't realize is there's almost no state funding that goes into these artificial reefs anymore. It's almost all 99.99% just private donations where people find ships or donate ships, and then we raise funds for the transportation of these pieces out to the reefs. That's why I started last year. We started the South Jersey Artificial Reef Association. It's a group on Facebook. And we have over 1,000 members now, and we've raised money. This past year, we'll be doing it again this year, and this money is funneled through the Sport Fishing Fund, which is a 501(c) charitable organization. Because believe it or not, there's no mechanism that you can directly contribute to the New Jersey Artificial Reef Program. It has to go through the Sport Fishing Fund, and they work with Peter Clark, who's the head of the Artificial Reef Program, to funnel money into getting these projects done. That's how the system works. So.
Well, imagine that, a government type of organization that's hard to navigate.
It was actually Governor Corzine that put the kibosh on the whole thing. He was afraid there was corruption going on.
Yeah,
so
well,
you used to be able to give funds, but now you can't.
There probably was. but we were getting a lot easier to get the reefs out there. And one of the things that goes into the cost is, I remember the Coast Guard ship that it had to get all cleaned. It had to get stripped. They did a lot of work on that in order to get it safe to sink, which is, it's pretty interesting when you think about that. But that thing was stripped bare. And I thought it was funny because I didn't go out to see the sinking. My uncle did. And they had to wait for it to actually sink and settle. So they get their final measurements, make sure everything was safe. And something went wrong in the sinking and it took forever. I think it took 4 hours in 4.5 5-foot chop or swells. Yeah, so he was beat up by the end of that. But that's where a lot of the money goes, is you transporting it and getting it ready to sink, because they're not sinking it with engines and oil tanks in there.
Yeah, they used to blow them up to sink them, but now they got all kind of where they cut holes and let them sink in a more appropriate type of way.
Yeah,
but it's an expensive process, and takes a lot of money to get these projects done. Ideally, I'd like to see the state kick more money into it so we could sink, 2 or 3 things a month or something like that. But with the way the mechanism is, it takes a while to get projects done, and it takes a good amount of money to get them done.
Yeah, but I'm seeing the results out there. Well, you run a guide service, so how's it affected the fishing over the past decade or so?
Well, the artificial reefs have taken over. Almost all my trips are to the artificial reefs. Sometimes we go out to some natural type of structure. But it was about 20 years ago they did a study to see how much fishing activity took place on these artificial reefs. And 20 years ago, it was well over 50%. They haven't done a study since, but I would suspect it's probably around 90% of the fishing trips involve the artificial reefs.
Yeah, I like to tell people, as a fishing coach, I like to tell people, when you hit the water and you see a whole bunch of boats, don't go there, because it doesn't mean that they know where they are. But if you're heading offshore in New Jersey, you might want to head to where the boats are, because it's the reefs. Because you're right. It's like a wasteland in between them. There's not much going on.
I always say the ocean cries out for structure. You drop anything hard, drop a brick, marine life will establish on it. And, the thing about the reefs that not everybody's aware of is the structure on the reefs gradually deteriorates. It doesn't last forever. Stuff, they call it subsidence, stuff sinks into the sand, the ocean scours it, and, the salts and all gradually degrade the structure. So the artificial reefs need to be constantly replenished. Yeah. That's kind of why I got involved in starting this, so our kids and our grandkids will have a place to fish.
I love it. And one good example is you look at the concrete ship, the Nautilus off of Cape May, and that thing has been there 90 years, and it's deteriorated significantly, and that's concrete. It's a lot of concrete, and you can't see much of it anymore. I've seen the pictures of when it first went down. It was pretty cool, but not how it went down, just cutting loose from the docks, but that's also going away, so to your point, replenishment is critical. We can't just it's not just set it and forget it. You got to keep adding.
A lot of people don't realize too, what we're really doing is we're creating bait communities and creating places for coral to grow, and inshore structures sometimes will get colonized by oysters and things like that. So the oysters and all the bivalves are important for filtering the ocean. The water didn't always used to be so green like it is. It didn't always used to be so silted up like it is. These artificial reefs solve a lot of problems. And, some of the environmental groups hate fishermen. They say, oh, we kill fish, all that kind of stuff. But what we're really doing out there is we're building structure. We're building habitat for all the creatures, corals, sea anemones, you name it. They all live out there. And it's establishing a place for them to feed and a place for them to live. So it benefits the whole ocean ecosystem. There shouldn't be any reason why people aren't in favor of artificial reefs.
Yeah, I actually wonder, are there any plans to go into the Delaware Bay with it?
They started one in the Delaware Bay now. They've only dumped concrete on it so far. It's on this side of the main channel.
Yeah,
the numbers are online. I've never actually been to it myself. A couple of my friends have been there, but the Delaware Bay has been so degraded by years and years of dredging. For people aren't aware of this. This has been going on for decades. They dredged the bay for whelk, some people call them conch, and they dredged the bay for oysters and clams and crabs and even horseshoe crabs. They dredge. The Delaware has a commercial fishery for them that does that. They just destroyed the bay to such a degree. Our Delaware Bay needs a lot more reef. Now on the Delaware side, there are a lot of artificial reefs inside the bay, but not so much. Only one on the Jersey side.
That's a shame. That's to me, man, back in the 80s, at the Delaware Bay, you could walk boat to boat and everyone was catching fish, and there were plenty left because it was just teeming. You know, it used to be the place where you went for striped bass. It used to be the place that you went for fluke every year. I mean, you just opening day, it was ridiculous. You could have conversations with 10 other boats without raising your voice. And it's not that anymore. And to your point, back in the 80s, 70s and 80s, the water got really bad. And the oysters, I mean, there's very few oyster beds in there. I keep seeing programs where they want to sell leases and everything, but I really haven't seen a lot of progress.
There are some natural oyster beds still left in the Delaware Bay. I don't think there's hardly any clam beds at all. I know a guy who used to clam the Delaware Bay. That's where they got all their clams, and now they don't even bother to go there anymore.
Yeah.
And right off of Cape May, one of my first charters was we used to fish the clam beds 3 miles off of Cape May.
Yeah.
The clam boats would go through and they would stir up all the clams and wait, and the stripers would go in there. It was an easy kind of fishing, but those beds are all destroyed now.
It's like a wasteland. It's a wasteland.
Yeah, it's a shame.
Now after something is put down, so let's use reef balls as an example, or concrete. How long is it typically before you would expect to see that start to hold life or become an active reef out there, and not just some debris that was settled onto the bottom?
I mean, literally stuff settles on it within minutes. I mean, it's that quick. I always tell people, like look at the bottom of your boat. How long does it take the biofilm to develop on the bottom of your boat? So it starts almost immediately. You know, it starts with the lower light forms, the algae like light forms, the soft corals and that type of stuff, and eventually it'll develop a crab population and other crustaceans and worms and stuff will move in. So usually within a year, the fish, catchable fish will start to show up there. Sometimes shorter than that. But it doesn't take long. When you drop something in the water, it doesn't take long for growth to start on it. Like I say, the ocean is crying out for structure. It's a shame we don't have. Imagine if the whole coast of New Jersey was nothing but wrecks and reefs, and it would be fantastic. And the fish would, we always want to be able to catch more fish, and people forget about this. But fish need to eat, and the more they eat, the healthier they are, and the healthier they are, the more they can reproduce. One problem with summer flounder right now is what they call recruitment is low. Recruitment means how many babies are born each year.
Yeah.
And one reason may be, we've destroyed so much of their food base that they don't have a food source like they used to. So that's another big purpose that the artificial reefs provide.
Yeah, I feel bad. I had a conversation with the captain of the Osprey. I don't know if you're familiar with the Osprey. I think his name's JT, up in New York. And we were talking out on a TOG trip last year, and he said, we were talking about the reefs, and he told me something I didn't know. He said, do you realize it's been, I think he said 30 years or 40 years since there's been an artificial reef started off of New York, because it's so bogged down politically, they can't do it. And they have money. They have organizations with money to sink ships, to put reef balls, tanks, barges, trains, and they can't get it done. And he said, you guys, not only do you have it good, but you have probably the best program I've ever seen for continued development of these reefs. And I think a lot of people overlook that. A lot of people like to make fun of New Jersey and New Jersey fishing, but it's got a lot to offer compared to other areas. And the reef system, it may not be the entire coast, but pretty much any inlet you come out of, there's a reef, there's an artificial reef somewhere close that you can hit.
Yeah, that's how it was designed to be that way.
I do have
such a diversity of structures there too. That's what I like. Some types of structures will hold flounder, and some types of structures will hold sea bass, and some types will hold tog. So it's and of course it's a big asset to the diving community as well.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Lots of divers out there.
Yeah.
While we're on the topic of the reefs, there are two questions that I think are worthy of touching on. Number one be crabbing and fishing. Is there a permitting process to drop reef structure?
Yeah, you can't just go out there and we nice if we could, but the reef sites have to be approved by the Army Corps of Engineers to begin with, and structure that's deployed. There's a whole list of things that it has to last a certain amount of time. It has to have a certain stability. So the artificial reef program will basically say it's okay to drop that type of thing. But there was I don't know if you remember, there was a big issue when all those subway cars became available from New York. And subway cars, people that don't fish don't realize, but subway cars are great reef structure. Yep. And they got held up because they found asbestos in the glue of the floor tiles. And they found some study in Japanese snails that showed that the asbestos could be harmful to these snails. And all these subway cars, until near the end, Delaware said, yeah, we'll take them. And that's why if you Delaware Reef Site 11, which is about 20 miles offshore Cape May, has about 900 of these cars. Yeah. Cape May Reef and some of the other reefs have some, but nowhere near what we could have had if New Jersey didn't have this big fight about this glue and the asbestos.
Reef Site 11.
Asbestos in the glue.
All you have to do from the fishing perspective is say Reef Site 11, and everybody knows all the way through New Jersey, all the way down through Maryland, because that's where everybody wants to go. And and a lot of it is because of those cars and the tog that those hold.
I was gonna say, aren't those cars stainless steel?
There's two types. They have what they call the stainless steel, and then they have the Redbirds. It was interesting. You would think you'd put stainless steel cars in there, and they would be the ones that last the longest. But when they sink structure, they send divers down to look at it and see how it's holding up. And within a year of dumping the stainless steel cars, they just flattened out in the sheets of metal. Whatever was holding those stainless cars together, I don't know, it was aluminum rivets or what they held them together with, but it didn't hold up. But interestingly, you would think, well, here's all these cars collapsed into these sheets of metal laying on top of one another. But it was some fantastic fluke fishing grounds.
Yeah.
It was like almost unbelievable how good it was. And a lot of people, would look on their machines and they didn't show up great. Like the Redbird cars, they're like 9 feet by 9 feet by 40 feet. And anybody can see those. But the stainless cars, and still to this day, 20 years later, after they've been there, they still hold a lot of fish. They're not that visible on the bottom. And the state is reluctant to dump anymore. That there's other types of stainless cars, but they're reluctant to dump that type of stainless car because they didn't meet the stability rules that artificial reef material has to have.
But they work so well.
Sounds like there's a lot of rules.
Yeah.
There's a lot of, I don't know what the rules are for. It's probably my cynical self saying it's probably because whichever politicians are there deciding the rules have somebody that has a certain kind of railway car they need to get rid of.
Well, they're worried about the structure moving off the reef is what they're worried about.
Yeah,
like during storms, like Florida used to dump a whole bunch of tires in the water. They thought that was a great artificial reef, and now they're paying people to remove the tires because the tires shifting around are actually destroying other portions of the reef.
I get that.
Washing up on the beaches. So, some of the rules make sense, but you know how rules are with fishing.
Yes, we all know. Absolutely.
All right, and then I have one more while we're on the subject. I feel fishy. How do you feel these reefs will be affected by the wind farms?
Well, it's interesting. I don't, the big worry is how these electrical lines are going to affect the fish migrations.
Yeah.
And, studies that show that they don't migrate across these electrical fields. And, there's so much information out there. And, the way the internet is nowadays, you got to take it with a grain of salt, what part of it is true or what part of it's not. We're actually trying to get these windmill farms. There's an awful lot of money behind them. I suspect they're going to go through to build some artificial reefs. And I've been in a couple of discussions. I suggested to them, if you want to prove that your electrical lines don't affect fish migrations, create several artificial reefs. Put some of them right on top of your electrical lines and put some of them a mile to the side, and then do a study to say which ones accumulate fish the best.
Yeah.
But they don't want to do it, because they're afraid.
Of course not. Of course not. I've seen those studies. I've talked to several people. It's tough to get people to come on to talk about wind farms. So I just want to say that because I do get a lot of requests for that because it is a very controversial topic. And part of it is because there's so much that we don't know. There's a lot of evidence that can pretty well say whatever you want it to say. But I have seen the studies that show that specifically summer flounder probably, and I shouldn't say probably, it indicates that summer flounder will not migrate over those lines, over that power. And if that's the case, Central New Jersey, you're going to have a pretty difficult season coming up once it goes live and for years after, because it's going straight in. What is it going into? Straight into Ocean City, right?
I think so, or it might even be Atlantic City. I thought they were building the transfer station right on the boardwalk.
I don't know.
But the ideal thing would be let them build one windmill, build one, put the lines in. Let's see what happens. Not build 30 or build 50 or build 100.
Yeah, I think they're planning for like 200 total.
Yeah, I mean it's all up and down the coast. When you look at the maps, it's sickening. These things I think need to be tested first. Some people claim there's good fishing around them, but how do you know?
Yeah, there could be. I've also seen articles where, towns have them and they've been broken down for the past 9 years and nobody will fix them because it's too expensive and it doesn't return the power back to the town that paid for them. So there, I don't know. There's a lot of things. As people can tell, I'm a little skeptical about them. I actually do believe that there are going to be big problems with them. I don't think it's all about dolphins and whales either. I think it's about the entire ecosystem being disrupted, and there's just so much that we don't know. And you got to get nervous when something gets fast tracked, because this was not only fast tracked, but it was pulled out of the local government as well. So they kind of circumvented. It was supposed to go through all the local governments and everyone was going to have their say. And then they changed it at the last minute that, nope, that's not going to be the case. It's just basically by fiat by the state of New Jersey and their partners. And that's how it is. So now we're going to have, 2,000 windmills potentially out there on the water. And we're not going to know if it's good or bad until you get a few years into it. So, hey, look, if you're a green type of person, you're rolling those dice, and I
that's
hope
a whole argument there too.
Yeah, I hope to God that you're right, that it's not going to do anything. I just don't think that's the case. I don't think it's the case at all. I think it's going to have some terrible negative impacts, but I'm not an expert at all.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not an expert either, but I do know saltwater and electricity don't play well together. So.
No,
Yeah.
I dropped a lithium battery in the water at the kayak launch last summer, and boy, that did not play well at all. It was fizzing and popping. I was running. That was not on purpose, by the way. Definitely not on purpose. All right, so look, this is not about windmills. I don't want to go too far into that, but one thing I do want to spend some time on, Captain, is talking about fluke fishing and really getting into that, because I think that we're set up for a pretty good season. I'm loving the way that the water temperatures have been. It hasn't gotten too cold. Last year on opening day, it was pretty cold water. It was still in the upper 40s, Ed, I believe it was.
Yeah, it was cold.
It was cold enough that I went on the kayak without any protective shoes on, and my feet were freezing for the rest of the day. And Ed thought it was hilarious. But
I find great pleasure in your misfortunes.
Yes, thank you. But it's nice right now. I mean, I was out last week, and it could have changed. It's gotten a little colder, but the water temperatures in the backwaters where I was in multiple different areas were up 55 up to 61 at various tides throughout the day. And with that type of a swing, what are you going to be looking for, Captain? Are you going to be looking for these fluke down deep? I mean, they're definitely inshore right now because of the what season it is, but where are you going to start looking for them if you're out there on the opening day? Well, first of all, are you going to be out there on opening day?
Yeah, my own personal trips. I fish the ocean. I don't fish the backwaters at all. My boat's a little too big to navigate the backwaters, but just I have some contacts, and I do fish some days in the back with some friends of mine, but they're catching keepers in the back already. Just so you know, I won't tell where, but they are catching keepers in the backwater already. But one thing a lot of people don't realize, most people think that all the flounder migrate inshore, into the backwaters and into the bays, and then they migrate back out. But that's not the case. A long time ago, there was a study done. They estimated less than 10% of the fish migrate into the backwaters. I think it's really higher than that now based on my own observations. But We've been out shark fishing in like May and caught big flounder 20, 30 miles out.
Yeah.
Yeah, so some of these fish never do go into the backwaters, but they're there already. These fish have already migrated, the ones that are going to migrate into the backwaters. And in the outgoing tides, when the water's a little warmer, they'll feed a little better. But I usually don't start fishing in the ocean until June.
Okay.
Early June is when I personally start. But
that's typically the boat. The boats typically go later for the Fluke because, as you said, you don't get skinny in a lot of these boats. Unlike Florida, where you can take a small boat and you're on every species. You have to have a bigger boat if you're going to be regularly fishing for Fluke all season long, because there is you'll still get them in the back, but if you're doing charters, for the most part, you're going to want to go offshore. You're going to want to hit those reefs.
Yeah, I mean, they're out there. There's fish you can get, but the water's cold. The bottom water is always colder than the top water, so the fish are fairly sluggish. But you can catch some, but it's just not somewhere you want to take a charter. It's not enough to catch early in the year in the ocean anyway.
Right. So yeah, I can say I've been catching a couple of keepers in the back pre-fishing the season, just trying to figure out what the trend's going to be on opening day. So I think I have a very good idea. I'm going again this week on Thursday, so we'll see if I can dial it in a little bit more. But are there particular? Well, so let's talk about flounder. Once you start taking out charters, what type of grounds are you going to be looking for early in the season?
We tend to fish further out early as the fish are migrating in. As the Fluke migrate in, they spawn offshore. Off of New Jersey, they're probably about 50 miles further north, like Block Island. They're spawning out about 85 miles. But as these fish move in, they're following like squid in and feeding on the squid as they go. They're following sand eels in. They're following they're following herring species. They're following other baits coming in. So if you can figure out the migration pattern of the bait species, then you can figure out where to fish for them offshore. But early on, we're fishing, usually running out 20 miles to fish. And as the water starts to warm up, then I'll concentrate more on the local reefs. But at the beginning, we're running out a little further.
And that's why you want to have a bigger boat in the mid-Atlantic, 20 miles in the mid-Atlantic in spring with the shifting winds.
Yeah, you got to pick your days.
Yeah. And you have a Grady White, is that right?
Yeah, 25 Grady White.
Yeah, nice boat.
Yeah,
I'm a fan of Grady Whites. Just that's what we had in our family for years and years. That's actually the boat that I really learned on, was a Grady White.
Okay,
it was awesome.
Yeah. All right. This one a long time.
And are you fishing with artificial lures and baits, or are you dropping natural baits and live baits?
Everything. People bring different things on the boat. People fish with gulp and all those different types of baits early, but any kind of strip baits, strips of squids, strips of bluefish, any legal fish, work well in the beginning. In fact, all year long we use that type of thing. One of the best strip baits I like is false mackerel. I mean false albacore.
False albacore, yeah.
Yeah, they're anything bloody and stinky. Of course, the sea bass like them a lot too, but those stinky type of baits work really good.
I've had my best sea bass on Fluke trips. I've had some monsters on Fluke trips, and it always happened to be when there was like one. You keep one, and you'd have to go home with one really nice one. But it's always as you said, natural baits, Fluke fishing, and false albacore I've never used. I've used mackerel to some pretty good success, because that's really stinky. Bunker also works really well.
Early in the year when we're in middle May when sea bass opens up, I'll be doing some sea bass trips, and we're just fishing with clams, just chunks of clams, nothing made into a strip or anything. And most of the trips we'll catch some flounder on them. In fact, one day I was doing a seminar, and this guy came up to me afterward. He said, "I caught my biggest fluke when I was anchored up fishing for sea bass with clams." I always tell people, humans are very sight oriented because we live in an air world, but fish can't, no matter how good their eyes are, can't see far because of all the algae and the plankton and the silt and all the different things in the water. So their sense of smell is extremely important in the fish world. So that's why, you can anchor. In fact, I had that happen to me one day. I was on a sea bass trip on a friend's boat a long time ago, and we were anchored up fishing with clams, and we were catching more flounder than we were sea bass. And then we started, let's drift and see if we can catch some more flounder. And we did much better anchored up fishing with these clams that stunk to high heaven. I always tell people, don't judge scent by what you think of it. It's what counts is what, how bad gulp smells to us humans. But the fish, fish are, there's this term we learned in veterinary school called anthropomorphism, and it means to give animals human characteristics.
Yeah.
So when you think about whatever kind of fishing you're doing, you have to learn to think like a fish and not interpret it. I always tell people, if you were a fish and you went to a store to look at bucktails, us humans, we like to look at them, and try to judge. A fish would pick it up and smell it.
Right. Right.
Scent is very important in the animal world.
It's one thing that I push very strongly is if you're using artificials, make sure there's a scent on it. So if you're not using Gulp, a pre-scented bait, put something on there, whether it's a Dr. Juice or Smelly Jelly or Procure. I love Procure. Just something, right? So it just doesn't smell like nothing or like plastic or like your fingers or whatever, either the lunch that you just ate and then you grabbed it, or the cigarette you just smoked and then you put it on the hook. You got to do something at least to get something in the water, because for that very reason. And all it takes, especially in the mid-Atlantic and Northeast, drop a camera down there and look at how dirty that water is. I don't know. You've probably seen the John Skinner videos, and they always look beautiful. I guarantee he's doing 100 hours of video to get that 1 minute clip of clear water where you can actually see those fish moving, because it's nothing like that. It is nothing like that when you're drifting in the backwaters. Yeah.
Scent is very important. I should say though, I've caught flounder myself, and I'm sure you guys have too, with nothing but I've caught them on diamond jigs.
Yeah.
I've been fishing in Florida lately. We've been fishing with these little metal jigs and catching flounder. So it doesn't have to always be scent related, but I always give the example. I say, if you had a party boat and you put half the people on the boat and you said, all right, you guys are going to get the best bucktails they made. You're going to get the best lures they got everything, but you're not going to have any bait. And on the other side of the boat, I gave all the guys, you guys can have gulp, you guys can have strips, any bait you want. And who's going to catch the most?
Right.
So the smell is very important. It's a thing that's, as a veterinarian, we run into the situation. I always tell people, like, how people see how a dog, like a bloodhound, will track a scent or something like that. And if the dog could talk, the dog would say to you, you can't smell that?
Right.
In humans, 90% of our brain focuses on what we see. But that's not the case with fish. It is not the case with other animals. So you have to learn. That's one of the things that's helped me a lot in my fishing is my scientific background. You got to learn to be the creature you're catching. You got to learn to understand, study the anatomy of the different fish that you try to catch, and study what they like to eat, and study how they feel, how they feed, and all these type of things. That's what I love about fishing, is the science behind it. It's very, very fascinating. But you'd be surprised how you can improve your own fishing ability by learning. Just studying the creatures and studying what they do.
Yeah, it's not the exact saying, but the spirit of it is, if you learn the bunker, you learn the striped bass. If you learn the prey, you understand the predator. And I agree with you. And the problem that I have is I don't have a background in veterinary, biology. No, that's not my background. So trying to find stuff that makes sense to a dummy like me can be difficult. I got a book on menhaden, and I was reading and I was like, wow, this doesn't make much sense. But I was able to pull a little bit of information out there trying to understand them. But yeah, if you know where the bait's going and you know how the bait acts and how it should be acting at any given time, you absolutely have an advantage over other people.
Yeah, and there's a lot of information you can learn. We had a funny story one day. I was out fishing on one of the artificial reefs, and because I fish on all this snaggy structure, we're constantly breaking off rigs and all this kind of stuff, and guys are getting tangled at our experience. So I was drifting off the reef, and I was getting people's lines untangled, and all of a sudden the guys that were still in the water started catching fish. And we're off the reef. There's no structure there at all. And I start looking on my screen, and I see little blue streaks, and what they are were squid.
Yeah.
So what had happened was the squid move inshore early in the year, and they lay their eggs in fronds, and they attach it to any kind of hard structure on the bottom, which in this case was just broken up shells and stuff. But when the squid go down to lay their eggs, the flounder don't eat their eggs; they eat the squid when the squid go down. So we went across this area, and like nobody was there. We had it all to ourselves, and we're like loading up on flounder. I said, "This is cool." So I went home and read everything I could about squid, and kind of learned about where they go to release their fronds of eggs and all that kind of stuff. And the funny thing was, unfortunately, I told one of my friends, where I was, and the next day, of course, there was 50 boats there. But
you always have to put it off by 20 miles. The same type of location, just 20 miles away.
I like to help my friends. It goes around,
Yeah.
But
sounds like we need to read more books, Rich.
I have a lot you can learn out there.
I quote unquote read a lot of books, but I always default to audiobooks first. So if it's not an audiobook, it gets bumped down on the list, because I like to do it when I'm, on the bike. When I go solo fishing, I'm always listening to a book when I'm fishing throughout the day, unless I'm actively talking for a video. So often in my videos, you'll see an earpiece in my right ear. I just keep one ear so I can hear boats about to hit me in the kayak. But yeah, if it's not an audiobook, I probably have 30 non-audiobooks on my list that are just keep getting replaced. I'm lazy like that, I guess. Yeah, we could do with some more reading though, Ed.
Yeah.
But you bring up a great point about the squid though. And I think that's a perfect example, because the squid is, I think a lot of people use it, and they use it in areas that they probably shouldn't use it. They're using it back in these shallow bays where squid don't really go as often. So I think there's a point to be made that yes, squid will work anywhere. Squid is it's like shrimp.
That's an easy bait, man. You give your kid a strip of squid and send it.
It's an easy bait because it doesn't come off, and it has a chance of catching the fish, but it's not the best, because you're not going to find a squid in a lot of the spots that people use the squid. Just because a flounder likes it doesn't, if it doesn't expect to see it back in a 2-foot flat, why are you throwing it? You'd be much better off throwing something else there.
We have to, you want to study the bait structure. Like in the backwaters, the fish are feeding on small things. They eat an awful lot of little shrimp, little minnows, things like that. Whereas offshore, they tend to feed on bigger baits.
Yes.
So in the back, in general, you want to, not always, but in general, you want to use smaller baits. Kind of the match the hatch kind of theory. So when I fish in the back with my friends, we don't use anything over about 3 inches long. I don't use a lot of squid myself because it gets dirty real quick.
Yeah.
But sometime if we're like in one of the places we fish early in the year where the flounder followed the squid inshore, then sometime squid or some gulp or something that matches the scent of squid will work well. But I personally don't use it a lot, but just because it gets dirty, that's what I don't like about it.
Yeah, it hits that muddy bottom, and you're you're done with it. Good point right here from Antonio. Grass shrimp works. For me, the grass shrimp is a little on the small side for some of the flounder that I'm targeting. And just for full disclosure, when I go flounder fishing, if I'm going and I want to bring home meat for dinner, I'm still always targeting over slots. So in New Jersey, I'm always targeting the larger fish, and I quite often come back releasing large fish and coming back with just one fish for the day. I think that's just the way that I do it. But I don't use grass shrimp for that. However, I would use that, for a lot of the slot size, because it's just a matching the hook type of an issue. But there are other things that you can use. Sand fleas are very underrated. Calico crabs, if you can get them, are a very popular bait for Fluke as well.
Very many of those come out of a Fluke stomach.
Yeah, and mantis shrimp. I don't know where they all come from, but
the mantis, the stripers like to eat those mantis shrimp too. Out on the reefs where I fish, they mostly feed on crabs.
The Fluke do?
Yeah, yeah. When I look at my core, it's interesting that and if you ever look at a Fluke stomach, a lot of times it'll be empty, And I always believed, I said, these fluke got to be regurgitating on the way up. There's no way that they all have these empty stomachs. So one day we were fishing on the Wildwood Reef on the shallow end. It was only like 40 feet deep, and it was clear enough you could almost see to the bottom. And we were watching the fluke as we were catching them, bringing them up, and you could see them vomiting. What was interesting was where they were vomiting, the triggerfish were coming in and eating what the fluke were vomiting. So we put a little tiny baits that looked like what the fluke was vomiting. We started catching a whole bunch of triggerfish. But that was the first time I actually got to see a lot of fish. You know, you see marlin jumping up in the air with their stomachs hanging out and that kind of stuff. A lot of fish regurgitate when they're captured.
Wow. So I've never seen a fluke do that. Well, I mean, how would I? You know, most of the water is 3 feet of visibility, but that's interesting. And that's a new tactic. So you start catching a lot of fluke in an area, you got a really slow drift, start dropping something that's similar to the the stomach contents for triggerfish.
Yeah, we're seeing more and more triggerfish in recent years. So
yeah, we definitely have.
While we're on the bait topic, MR Johnson is asking, what are your thoughts on fish bites?
It's interesting. I've been fishing in Florida lately, and the guy I fish with uses fish bites, and he always puts a little piece of shrimp on the end. And so just today as an experiment, we were out there fishing for speckled trout, and I said, I'm going to use the fish bites with no shrimp on it at all, and you use your shrimp bites with the shrimp on it, and we were catching equally. So fish bites works very good. I'm going to try it more on fluke this year. I never tried it very much, but it's like impressive. Put a little 1-inch strip that doesn't look like anything. It's all scent based.
Yeah, and, are you talking the bloodworm ones?
The ones I'm using are shrimp flavored.
Oh, okay.
They're pink. I call them pinkies. They're like, I probably have a bag of them right here.
Looks like bubble gum.
Yeah, they have a couple different styles now. It's not just the bloodworm ones.
The bloodworm ones work really well for fluke too, though.
I haven't tried them for fluke. I have them in my bag all the time for. There you go.
I don't want to advertise for fish bites, but
that's all right. We tell people no matter what brand it is, if it works, we're telling them about it.
I can let you know next year how well it worked, but it's impressive. You know, the trouble with the gulp is that you get the tail bitten off; they don't work so well anymore. But
yeah,
so I'm going to try out this fish bites this year.
Ed, go ahead and finish. I have something I want to say about gulp in a second.
Oh, well, with the fish bites, I always keep them. I always have a bag of the bloodworm ones handy for taking the kids down to the beach for like kingfish and stuff in the surf. They work great.
Yeah,
especially in a pinch, can't get bloodworm or whatever, everything's closed. Always have a bag of those on hand.
Yeah, I did the experiment. It was just on white perch, but where I was using on I had a top and bottom rig, and I would put on the top, I would put bloodworm, and then on the bottom I'd put a bloodworm fish bite. And then after I'd catch a fish, I'd switch them. And I literally came out even for the day. It didn't matter where they were. They were, top hook, bottom hook, fish, natural bloodworm, a real bloodworm versus fish bites. And the fish bites worked really well. So there was really no discernible difference. I think the natural live bloodworms caught a couple more. I think it was maybe, I'm just guessing, but maybe 18 fish to 15 fish. But the fish bites caught bigger ones. So I don't know if it wasn't scientific, but they definitely work. But I want to talk about gulp because I have a problem with gulp. And
oh boy,
John Skinner just rolled over somewhere. He's like, whoa, hold on a second. I did not do well with gulp last year. For the first time since fishing them for years and years and years, I did not do nearly as well with gulp as I did with other artificials and natural baits. Have either of the two of you noticed that, or is it just me?
I had a rough go last year. It wasn't as good as the year before with gulp. So I don't know.
Go ahead, Adam. I'm sorry.
No, that's fine. Go ahead. You're good.
I was gonna say it wasn't my experience. A lot of the guys that I take, I provide the natural baits, but a lot of the guys bring gulp, and sometimes they'll say, well, pink shine's working the best, and then other times it'll be the pink that's working the best, and different things. But the guys that I take out do very well on it. I didn't see any change this year personally, but
See, now for me, anytime I go offshore, I could throw anything on that hook and they're biting it. As far as inshore, they were picky last year, at least in my opinion.
Yeah,
the guy I fish with inshore, early in the season, that's all we use is gulp, and we did great. Just no other bait, just little 4-inch, mullet or mullet type gulp on there. We did great.
See, I still caught. It just wasn't like it used to be to me, and I caught just as many on scented artificials as I did on gulps, and I actually caught more on natural baits. So if I put, what I did is for a lot of the season, I ended up using a live killie, or for others, a minnow on one hook. And then on the, either the top or the bottom, the opposite one, I would use a gulp, or I would use another artificial. And when it was those two together, it seemed like the natural was just out producing. But you know what? It's fishing. It could just be me. It could have been a confidence thing for some reason. I still had a good season. I have not one complaint about last season, except that I can't seem to catch those smaller slot size fish. But as I mentioned, I'm not really trying to. I hate cleaning them.
I always tell people with bait too. A lot of people, bring different strips of bait, but they don't take care of it. Like people will take whatever kind of fish, a bluefish, already cut into strips, and they lay it on their bait board and it sits out in the sun for half an hour.
Yeah.
I always tell people that the scent degrades in exponential fashion. So it's not like after 1 minute and 2 minutes and 3 minutes, it's 1 time worse and 2 times worse and 3 times worse. It's 4 times worse and 8 times worse, and then 6. It degrades very quickly. And even though if I give you a strip of bait, let's say it's a minute old, and you smell it, and I give it to you when it's 2 minutes old, you can't smell the difference, but fish can.
Yeah.
Like I say, they're all fact. I could spend a half an hour talking about how they smell and how their olfactory system is different than ours. But people, you need to make sure that the baits that the fish are consuming in nature are what they smell like when they're alive and when they're not baked in the sun and when they're not overheated. So you have to either keep your baits out of the sun or keep them cool or something. People and now, I fished with one guy, and he was cutting up some bait with it. We cut it into like squares. I said, well, don't you cut them? I always cut mine very carefully into nice pendants and something,
Right.
so they flutter and all that kind of stuff. He said, well, why would you do that? Well, they work better. That's why.
Yeah. Well, for a couple reasons. A couple reasons. You get more surface area for the scent to come out. And second, it actually moves. Get a little cube going through the water. Maybe it works if you drop it in a chum slick or something, but
maybe the Fluke Lake waffles. Who knows?
Yeah, they could.
I always tell people when you're fishing, you want to appeal to as many of the senses of the fish as you can. So you want it to be fresh, so it has the natural type of scent. You want it to be in the proper shape so that it moves properly. If you see people fish with teasers and stuff that have a lot of fluorescent type of or reflective type of characteristics, that's because a fish can see polarized light. To us humans, it looks the same. So reflective light, like would normally bounce off a bait, makes the baits more appealing. You try to use a color. Sometimes we'll say, "What color are you using?" I'm using pink. How deep you're fishing? I'm in 90 feet of water. I said, you're not fishing with pink. You're fishing with gray.
Right.
So but you want to, in general, you want to try to appeal with your baits or your rigs to as many of the fish's senses as you can that would entice them to go after it.
I agree.
Because it amazes me how different guys on the boat using everything the same will perform differently just because they're not jigging properly. They're not making a natural movement to their baits or enticing movements. I always say flounder fishing is an art form.
Yes.
And the longer you do it, the better you get at it.
Yeah. Agreed. Ed, we're at 54 minutes. We should probably start hitting questions.
Yeah, I have a couple picked out. Kevin Hoffman, and my camera died. Kevin Hoffman, your thoughts on sand fleas for fluke bait?
Hey, Kev, I know Kevin. I've never used them, Kevin, but I suspect that they would work okay. I remember one day I opened up a fluke and it had sand dollars inside their abdomen, inside its belly. It's amazing what they'll eat. So, I'm sure there's certainly sand fleas in the environment where the fluke hunt, and I would suspect they would eat them, but how effective they would be, I've honestly never tried them.
And I'll throw in from the backwater side. They're very effective. And one of the good things about when I'm fishing for sheep's head and fluke in the same day is I can use the bait for both. And it's very successful. Now, when I do it, I typically, as I mentioned, I fish the top and bottom. So I typically put the sand flea on the top. It keeps it up off the bottom a little bit, and it doesn't get buried in a bucktail. So it just stays on a blank, regular straight hook on the top. I don't have a traditional teaser when I'm using sand fleas, and I just let it stay up there. But yeah, they eat them, and they eat them quick. So I would definitely recommend them.
Good.
All right, next up we have ADFD. Late summer on the reefs. How big is too big for a strip of fluke belly, false albacore, mahi belly, etc.?
Yeah, and Eric's going to have a bunch of those.
I always use a variety of sizes. Some of when I cut strips, I'll cut them. Some will be 4 inches long. Some will be like 6 or 8 inches long. It's really hard to make them too long. I always say that the fluke have body dysmorphic syndrome. In other words, they can't understand how big they are. I've opened up a fluke's belly and taken out a squid that was longer than the fluke itself.
Yeah.
So it's really hard to get too big. Of course, if you're going to fish with longer baits, you're going to have to drop it back to them a little bit further. But in general, I would say probably 6 inches is adequate. But I've caught them on strips longer than that.
Now, are you in the springtime? Are you going with the smaller baits because of the season, or are you just, is there a time for the bigger baits, or does it not matter? You'll use them at any time.
In the ocean, anytime.
Okay.
I can say they're used to feeding on large baits out in the ocean. I mean, with that being said, I always try to get by with the smallest bucktails we can, because you'll catch more fish because you can give it better action on the smallest bucktails. And that's, we use a real light braid, 10 pound or whatever, so we can get fish with light bucktails. And I have some guys that won't use long baits. They want to use short baits, and they do good. I'm sure you guys know, as everybody develops their own technique, everybody develops their own system. Everybody's got their own favorite lures and baits and all different. And I don't think there's one better than the other. I just think people find that certain mechanisms will work better for them.
Yes.
And it may be entirely different than what I would do and what somebody else would do. I learned on my charter boat, to keep my mouth shut. I've seen people catch fish on stuff that I swore would never work. You look at this thing. I used to take these guys out, and they would put so much baits on their hook. I used to call it the mop effect. They would put a piece of squid, they would put a piece of herring, they would put a piece of gulp, they would put 4 or 5 things on. You couldn't even see the hook. And these guys would catch fish like crazy.
Yeah.
I learn a lot by being quiet sometimes.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. Giving it a chance.
And I think as far as Jersey goes, if you're going to use fluke belly, you have to have the rack on the boat in case you get stopped. I believe that's a thing.
Fluke bellies, you have to keep one legal fish on the boat that you filleted for the fluke belly. Is that what you mean? Yeah.
Yeah. So the problem is, if you bring them from a previous trip, it's technically illegal unless you bring the rack with you. So
correct. Let's see, Brooklyn Angler. When do we start looking for fluke from shore?
Now. I know for a fact. Bayside Dave is on. He's catching them now. So if you're in New Jersey, if you're in Delaware, Maryland, even New York, where it's now. You can catch them from shore now, and as a matter of fact, you can catch them most of the year, even in the winter, from shore. It's just a lot harder. I don't know if either of you two have a different answer to that.
I'm not an inshore specialist, so I'll defer to you guys.
Very rarely fish from shore. All right, crabbing and fishing. What is so attracted to fluke in the areas behind Strathmere?
I've never fished. I fished behind Avalon a couple of times. What is so attractive about it? I mean,
yes, I can. Let me just take a. Why don't you go to another question? We'll come back to that. Let me just take a quick look at that one.
Okay. I think we're pretty well caught up. Here you go, Antonio. How do you set up your rigs?
The typical rig I use on my boat, I make my own bucktails. I could do a show sometime to show you how I make them, but I lose so many, I might have to make my own. But I put a bucktail on the bottom, and then about 18 inches above that, I put a teaser, usually just a plain hook most of the time. And we'll put, a piece of gulp on that or some other type of bait on that. And same on the bottom on the bucktail. But it's like almost like a top and bottom rig essentially, but the bucktail is on the bottom, and then 18 inches up, you got a teaser.
Okay. Yeah,
I use that type because they don't tangle as much. I fish with the ones with longer leaders, and I tried a million different things, but I got to use what works for my anglers, so I'm not constantly untangling lines and all that kind of stuff. So, but it's a very, very efficient system. I
do use a similar setup to yours, but since you said you make bucktails, we can geek out on that for a minute. I do as well. I own a company. I make all my own bucktails. What style head of bucktail do you use?
I'd have to show you a picture of it. I may have one here. Let me see. I make mine out of a fishing weight.
Now I'm intrigued.
I got some on my bench here. These are a little bit beat up, but we call them the poor man's bucktail. My friend Michael came up with the idea. Oops, let me get him where you can see him.
Oh my Lord. I love that.
You can see you just put an eye, you drill a hole, and you put an eye. I'm not sure if I'm showing up on the camera right or not, but you put an eye.
Yeah,
on
you
here.
are.
And then this is believe it or not, you got to use 80-pound mono, or they get bitten off. I never believed I needed 80, but this is a B2 squid. There's a little bead here, and there's a 5.0 octopus hook. So if you ever want me to do a video, I could show you guys how I make them. But I lose 300 or 400 of these a year, so I have to find a system that worked well for me.
That's quite interesting.
That is awesome. I love that. The poor man's bucktail.
Oh yeah, it's the action you get off the back.
I think they work better than the custom bucktails. Really, like I don't want to name any names, but because you get that springy action, you can see the way I tie it tight, it keeps it up in the air like that.
Yeah.
And so and you put the eye forward, so when you're drifting along, it's actually tilted down like that. So let me try to get in the right angle here. So when the fish comes up behind it, it's it's set. You don't want it up like this. When the fish is coming at it, you want it tilted down. So you put your eye a little bit forward, and the fish comes up, and it's like a perfect.
It's funny. So that same concept is what for the big head.
Yes.
So that you keep the tail down. Yeah, I love that.
Mm-hmm.
I love
that's
that.
interesting. That's pretty cool.
All right.
Go ahead. I don't want to take up too much time.
No, it's I was just going to say because we're at the hour, and I did say that I would answer what's so good about behind Strathmere. I just wanted to look at it and make sure I look at so many maps every day. I just wanted to make sure I was thinking the right spot, and I am. So, and this is going to be, take this if you're going to fish in the backwaters and you have marsh areas. This is why those are outstanding for inshore backwater fluke. And it really comes down to what a fluke is at its heart. It is an ambush predator. It's an extremely aggressive fish. A lot of people think it's not. They think, a bluefish is aggressive or a striped bass is aggressive. Yeah, and a flounder is just as, if not more aggressive, especially compared to a striped bass. It's extremely aggressive. And if you look at the area behind Strathmere and a lot of these South New Jersey, even Delaware, Maryland, Virginia areas, really all the way down the coast, when you have these marshes and you have these drains coming out from all these little creek systems, and it comes over heavy structure. So a hole, or, comes up to a point, and then there's a hole, there's a drop, there's a ledge. That is a perfect ambush point for a flounder. Now, it doesn't mean that you can just drift all the channels and catch all the really nice flounder all day long. You'll see people doing that, and they'll catch flounder, but they're not the really nice ones. They're the smaller ones. The bigger ones are going to be at those really heavy structure points. They're going to be at the drains from these smaller creek systems where there's a predictable flow of bait coming into a very specific area where they can set up a good ambush. They are camouflaged, and they can spring up onto this bait as it travels through the area. If you just take a look at the contours on the bottom of the water column behind Strathmere, it is ridiculous how many holes, how many choke points, and how many creek drains are coming out into these channels. and that's where you're going to find them. So that's what makes it good, but it's not what makes Strathmere good. It's what makes all the areas that have those characteristics really good for flounder. So look at Wildwood, look at Cape May, look at Avalon, Stone Harbor, all the way up Ocean City, Atlantic City. I mean, you have some amazing fishing behind Atlantic City, Ventnor, Long, all of those areas. And it's because of those principles. It's an ambush point with a lot of creek drains where you're going to get those smaller baits. You're going to have the crabs washed out, especially on the outgoing tide. You have sand fleas. You're going to have all of that stuff. So that's the quick answer to why. And I think it was Ben that asked that question. If you take a look at smart fishing spots and you look at the contours on the bottom, you're going to find a couple dozen good spots under different situations that you can fish on opening day, and you'll probably be pretty successful.
I feel like I just watched one of your YouTube videos.
Sorry. Well, so that's it. So, Captain, I want to thank you for coming on. Is there anything that you wanted to mention before we go?
Not particularly. If anybody's interested in donating to our artificial reefs, you could go to the sportfishingfund.org, and there's a donate button right on their website that you can donate, or get a hold of me and I'll tell you how to do it. But we appreciate all the donations to the artificial reef program. It's going to benefit us and our kids.
Now, real quick on that program, do you guys do any fundraisers, or is it just strictly like a fundraising event, or just like donations come here and there?
Somewhat donations. We've been trying to get involved with the tournaments. There's one that Bob Duckenfield does at Jim's Bait and Tackle in Cape May. We were involved in their tournament. And then the marina where my boat is, in Breezy Lee Marina, we did a fundraising tournament. But if anybody has an interest in their area, we can actually proportion the funds so it goes to artificial reef sinkings in whatever area you are in. Like if you want something for Absecon Reef or whatever reef you want it to go to, you just tell us, and we have a mechanism that we could allocate funds, and when we get enough, we'll do a sinking at your reef. So you can pick and choose where you want your donation to go. But it's all done through that Sport Fishing Fund, or like I say, get a hold of me and I'll direct you. So
that's pretty cool.
That is cool.
Mm-hmm.
I love that. All right. Well, Captain, if you can hold on for 1 minute after we go. And I want to thank everybody for tuning in live and everyone who's tuning in afterwards to listen to the podcast. We appreciate it. You got flounder season opening up all up and down the East Coast over the next couple of weeks. So just be ready. And if you can, get out there and support these artificial reef funds in the state that you're in. New Jersey, as we've talked about, has an outstanding history of building reefs and habitats. So support that if you can. Next week, we will have Captain Steve Griffin on. We're going to talk bull reds in the Chesapeake, which I'm definitely looking forward to. That'll be a fun one.
Yeah.
So Captain Harv, thank you again. And everybody, make sure you take advantage of any weather windows, and anytime you can get out in between the wind that's forecasted for much of our area, get out there, get on the water, and get some tight lines.